Okay, so welcome to the FlowJo webinar series. This is Kinetics. I'm John Quinn, Director of Science and Product Development at BDBI Informatics, aka FlowJo. My contact information, as you can see on the screen, is john.flowjo@bd.com. Write me at any point with suggestions for improving the software, questions. You can also write to our tech support group at any time for help at flowjo@bd.com. So the data set that I'm intending to use for today's webinar, I got down from Flow repository. So I wanted to again thank everyone who posted to the Flow repository. Having good data available for folks like me who like to do data analysis but don't necessarily have a cytometer is an invaluable resource and a great way to cross-validate results and experiments. So thank you particularly to Anna Bajnok and her group today in that they posted a paper using some kinetics analysis to see how some various blockers and treatments of kinetics channels may impact patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And so in general, the data is going to try two different blockers and a control and do kinetics profiling of a series of different populations of T cells and see if we can identify any differences. So the link for the data is there. When we post this to recorded webinars, I will also put the link right up on our webpage. So without further ado, let's get out of PowerPoint and go into FlowJo. Okay, so I have a FlowJo Workspace set up here. As the point of this particular discussion today is kinetics, I took the liberty of just putting a few gates on following the recommendations in the paper. I'll just pop up a quick layout editor of the handful of gates we put on that just, again, went along with the instructions of the authors of the paper on how to identify lymphocytes, CD4, CD8s, Th1, and Th2 lymphocytes. And that's what we have there. So the important part of that is just to mention that if you want to apply a kinetics experiment, you can create whatever series of upstream gates that you would like, whatever cleanup gates that you normally do, whatever populations you would like to identify, and apply kinetics downstream after that. And then applying a kinetics analysis is simply a matter of picking the population that you're interested in, going to Tools, and clicking on the kinetics icon, and you'll get something like this appearing on your screen. Okay, so in this experiment, the authors were attempting to look at the ratio between free and bound calcium to see the effect of blocking each of these calcium channels on each of the various subsets. FlowJo will look for a parameter that has something like ratio in the name of it, which this one does here, and use that on the y-axis, and then the plot across the x-axis is going to be time. Incidentally, if your data did not have a ratio parameter already built in, but you had collected the two channels that you would like to create a ratio from, you can simply right-click on any file. I'm going to go over here to the first one, right-click. I'm going to choose derive parameters. You can then pick whichever parameters it is you'd like to create the ratio from. Let's see, it was perhaps FTSE, and it was divided by per CP. So I'll pick FTSE. I'll type in the slash, pick per CP. And then you may want to adjust the scale. Linear is good. And when you get to something ratiometric, perhaps it's going to be smaller. I don't know, maybe something like that. Anyway, you can fix the scale to whatever is going to make sense to get everything on screen nicely, and then call your parameter whatever you want. Something like that, alternate ratio. Say okay. And then at any point you could drag and drop that to the group and apply that alternate ratio parameter to the rest of your data. So just to mention to the folks who are joining us, we're doing some kinetics analysis here off of a data set with this identifier from Flow repository. And there is a Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom link that allows you to type in questions. We have all the attendees muted by default on entry. So anyway, I've opened up one of these kinetics analysis. I have the ability at the start to choose 3 different means of applying ranges to the data. I could hand draw a series of range gates. I could specify how many I wanted and adjust thereafter, and I could hit auto to attempt to auto gate this. I think FlowJo is generally going to assume there is a little bit of a steady state pre-stimulation at the beginning. So I'm going to just choose, since we don't see one here, maybe just to create 2 ranges and adjust from there as the most effective way to approach this data. So typically what I'm looking for in a calcium flux experiment, or in any kind of kinetics experiment, I should be sure to generalize, is that I expect to see some kind of response and then a steady state period where the system generally starts returning towards normal. And so perhaps I want to separate those 2 portions of the data to characterize the speed, the duration, the magnitude of the response, and perhaps I want to characterize the duration of the steady state period, how long it persists for, and what its magnitude is. There's a few ways one might go about doing that. So let's open up the options menu here to start. First off, it's asking what statistic we'd like to see for the y-axis. Median seems fine. You have the ability also to mean, geometric means, or percentiles, depending on what it is you're looking for. There's also another suite of options that are the percent regarding some threshold. The most common choice for this is to use, if there wasn't a data set, the steady state portion leading up to whatever stimulation event occurred as the way to mathematically define a threshold. I could, for example, define this as percent of cells above threshold, type in a number that I knew somehow, maybe based on experimental design, or more usually to use the percentile of events within one of the ranges. In this case, we don't really have a steady state leading up to this, so I'm going to leave this undefined, just cancels for the moment. But you could ask about, so let's go back to median here and just point out that you could look at the median of the cells over that threshold, the mean of the cells over that threshold, except essentially all of the other statistics just in comparison to a set threshold. Again, either entered numerically or calculated via the data. We'll stick with median here. You can also apply smoothing, none, Gaussian, or moving average. Moving average basically just takes a small window of the data and takes the average of the signal in that small window and then slides the window across the data to get you a smoother look. I think this is a useful thing to do. Gaussian will do a similar thing, but weigh the data towards the center of that particular time frame a little heavier to maybe make sure you've got a more accurate representation of that particular time slice. I think either one's okay, and I think it helps resolve the data. It takes a little bit of the noise, the variance of individually measuring thousands and thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, as the case may be, cells in this case, and smooth it out so you can see the pattern. So either of those are fine. Maybe we'll stick with the Gaussian average here. And then for however many ranges you've created, you get a series of statistics down here. Stretch this out a little bit. So you've got the total data set, you've got range 1, you've got range 2. A start time and end time, the time at which the peak within that range was encountered, the value of that peak, the mean of the y value, in this case the ratio within that range, the slope, so is this response positive or negative? So at the beginning, we've got a strong positive response, and then it goes negative thereafter for the longer period of range 2. You've got the area under the curve, AUC, which is typically thought of, I think, as the most important of the statistics. And maybe at the end here, just noticing some of my stats, I want to adjust my ladder range just to get rid of where the experiment was apparently turned off. There we go. Okay, the AUC, the area under the curve, which is the integration of the space under each one of these curves so that you're summing up both magnitude and duration into one number. Then dt is just delta t, or the time range of each one of these ranges. Okay, so you've got those stats built in now. They're applied, and we can get them out in a number of different manners. So for one thing, I may want to take this kinetics analysis and apply it to other cell subsets. You can do so simply by dragging and dropping to any of these other sets. Oops, I already did it to them. It's the T2s that I didn't do. Okay, and so now I've applied a kinetics analysis to each of those other types of cells. So we could click on CD8s, for example. Okay, those are CD8s. Double click on the kinetics, see what the response was there. And in fact, it seems like we've got a much more muted response. And one of the aims of this study, I think the hypothesis was to show that we expect that these blockers may in fact produce a more muted response in, I believe it was TH2s and CD8s. And so perhaps we see that already in one of the samples, although I believe this one has not had a blocker applied. That might be a control. So anyway, we shall see. Okay, we can adjust these. We can look at these, see if we agree with the time period that we'd like to be the starting point. So we see very little response there. I don't know if that's a response or that's just noise, but we could adjust that if we want it, just by grabbing on the range gate and adjusting if we want. Okay, next, we could apply any of these kinetics analyses to the whole group just by dragging and dropping. So we'll take the kinetics node and drop it on the CD4s, the TH1s. Now I could multi-copy paste as well, but I'm already about done, so I'll just finish up there with the CD8s. Okay, so we've now applied the kinetics analysis to all of the samples. I think we've got about 30 here in our group. Going to the layout editor, I'm going to click the plus for a new layout. Okay, I'm going to move some of the zoom controls out of the way here for the time being so I can see the rest of this. And perhaps we'd like to see what that kinetics response was for each of the CD4s. When you drag and drop into the layout editor, you will get the plot from the Kinetics platform. You will get a stats box here. Just gonna clear out our page breaks. Stats box is editable. If there's some of the statistics you're not interested in, you could simply highlight and delete. If I was uninterested, perhaps in the start and end time, I could delete that. Everywhere where there is a green box, that is an element, either a stat or a name that is being read directly from the data file. And so it'll update if you modify your model, change the name of your gate, etc. So leave as are. You also have a text box here at the bottom, just the annotation box telling you which sample it is, which population it is, how many cells are always present. So we could take that. We could take perhaps the kinetics from the CD8s. Maybe tighten this in a little bit. Take the kinetics from the TH1s and perhaps the TH2s and put those all in a line for analysis. Oop, and I left behind the stats. Okay. All right, lastly, if we wanted the comparison, we can do overlays of the Kinetics platform by just simply dropping the various nodes on top of each other. And we then can get a direct comparison of the magnitude of all the responses. I'm going to delete that here as I have all the numbers elsewhere. Maybe just set that at the end with its legend underneath. Okay. Neatening up, I'm just going to highlight the row with that and arrange it so that their tops line up. Maybe bring that down just a touch. Okay. General FlowJo basics. The dashed lines here indicating how these will line up on a page. If I'm just keeping this in FlowJo or going to a web page or making a movie or something of the like, they're unimportant. If I was going to print this or make it a PowerPoint slide or a PDF, then this will set the bounds of what my PowerPoint or PDF looks like. I can go to the layout editor, controls then, and decide how I would like to show these plots for all of the samples. So perhaps I would just like to make this a web animation. And let's put the output on my desktop. Okay, batch report it is. Okay, so FlowJo will think for a little bit. It will create these plots for every one of the samples in order with whatever formatting that I put on, and then turn it into a movie that'll pop up here in a second. Okay, and we have the ability to scroll through our data. I'm going to zoom that out a little bit. and see how overall the comparison of these various kinetics populations looks. Just to be aware, the TH1s here, there were very few in many cases. And so we will see a few plots here that just really look like a line chart of, what it would look like if you graphed, 18 items or something to that effect. You can control the frame delay by making bigger or smaller numbers so that it goes slower or faster through your data based on how long you want to wait. You can stop at any point, and if you saw one of interest, click on that particular plot and advance to that one. Okay, so that's our graphical analysis. Next, let's talk about how to get the stats out. I'm going to go to the table editor. And then for any one of these kinetics populations that I'm interested in, let's start with the CD4s. I can just grab the kinetics node, drag it and drop it in, and I'm going to get every one of those statistics. Oops, I just rearranged by dragging, which is something you can do. Okay, and then it is up to you which ones that you'd like to use. Perhaps the all events time slice, not particularly interesting, since it's sort of just the summary of the entire process. There will assuredly be experiments where that is interesting. Maybe not here. And then again, if there's any stats that you don't want to see for your large table, perhaps we can take them out. For example, the delta t's will be the same for every one of the samples because I've just applied this to the group and applied it to each one of them. So whatever they are. Maybe even the start and end times, maybe not particularly exciting. We could take those out to simplify our table a little bit. And then we're getting the statistics for each of range 1 and range 2 for the CD4s. And so perhaps we want to change the name here a little bit. I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to go to create column names. I'm going to say, here's my template. I would like the last population name. Well, actually, the last population name will be kinetics in this case. I'm going to actually go complete gating path this time. So I get lymph CD4s kinetics. I'm going to add which parameter I want to see, because I want it to tell me whether it is range 1 or range 2. And then I'm going to say I'd also like to see the statistic. Okay. Oh, I thought I took out the times. Oh, I guess I didn't. Oh, I left in the end time. Hey, look at that. All right, well, we can go back and take that out. Okay, cool. Now we've got the peak time, which may be the interesting part. The peak, the mean, the slope, and the area under the curve. Specifically for the CD4s, we can compare them to the CD8s by dragging in the CD8, removing the portions here that we perhaps don't want to see. Okay, and actually we want to get rid of the all-time slice entirely, I think. That's all good. Maybe take out these and that. Okay, I think that's the stats I'd like to see in my table. At this point, I can batch to, again, a variety of places. Printer, display, file, current layout, clipboard. Let's just batch display. Perhaps I would like to heat map these as well. I am going to highlight that, go to visualize, choose it to be a heat map, and then say, create table. All right, so there we go. All right, so there are all my statistics. I might want a little more space here to get the name of those columns in, picking the full range was so-so, but there's peak time, for example. Range 1 area under the curve. And if we want to sort these, we can double click. And then I'll just put them all in order by that particular column. So we can look over and see if we see a pattern between over here in the workspace. I annotate it. Let's annotate right in the file name as well. K, MG, and TR are the 3 different blocker combinations. And so we can check out our table to see if we see a prolivity of Ks or TRs or MGs at either the top or the bottom of any one of these particular statistics. So biggest, longest initial period here, response period. There's range 2 area under the curve. We could sort by that and see that perhaps the Ks are as large as anything, which I believe was the control in this experiment. So perhaps not showing a very powerful response to these blockers. Nature found a way to get around our blockers. Okay, so tables then can be exported to any variety of formats you want, visualized here, saved as web pages, exported to Excel, etc., etc. Okay, so that is the gist of the Kinetics platform. You'll bring in data, you will gate it up however you want to provide some cleanup, identify the populations of interest. You will pick the populations that you'd like to see a Kinetics profile on. If you've already got a ratio parameter or whatever it is that you would like to study for the Kinetics on, you're ready to go. If you want to derive a parameter, it's just done via right-click, derive a parameter, and you can go create one right here. Drag to the group if you want to apply to all. Go to Tools. Pick Kinetics once you've got a population, highlight it. Identify ranges however you'd like to do so. We can try auto here. It seems like there's only, yeah, there's kind of only one range there. So auto might struggle with this particular data set. I claim it will generally work fairly well. Okay. Drag and drop the Kinetics node into the layout editor. If you want to see the graph and some statistics, drag it into the table editor if you'd like to see numeric output. And in the layout editor, drag and drop various kinetic results on top of one another so that you can compare them to one another, and you're good to go. Batching works for all of those operations to apply this to a group. All right, I see no questions in the Q&A panel there. So I'll hang out for a second here just to see if anyone wants to ask some afterwards. And I will mention while I'm waiting on questions that if you open up the browser, go to FlowJo Home, and the Learn tab, there's a Webinars tab, which you've probably found to get here right now today. But there's also an Explore Previously Recorded Webinars button. If you click that, this one will be appearing here shortly, and you can have access to all the previous webinars, and we'll post a link to the data as well here. All right. I don't see any more questions. Again, my email address is just john.flowjo@bd.com. Feel free to write me at any point. Thank you very much for attending. Especially, yeah, stay safe, especially while every of us are working at home and we're all a little bit worried about a pandemic. Thank you for joining me and to get into doing some science together. Nice to talk to you. All right, take care.